I was as stunned as everyone else, and I think the biggest question of all has still not been answered. How does he pull it off, and how does he finance a potential deal?
Does that mean you think it's unlikely to happen? Give us the probability here. What do you think?
I think it's less than 50% that it happens. Never say never. But if you go through a process of elimination and say, how could this be funded? Well, a typical LBO is funded by large amounts of debt and a modest amount of equity. They certainly have the modest amount of equity, but getting, potentially $30 to $65 billion worth of debt, I think will be very difficult for a company, given, it essentially has no cash flow today. So then you say, okay, well, you're going to need a lot of equity, and you may need a similar amount of equity, and there just aren't that many people who are looking to put in $30 to $60 billion, even a consortium of people, and to do so at a price of $420 when the stock was trading at $300 last week. So you go through that process and say, look, that feels like a difficult set of circumstances to actually pull together. Now, is it possible that Elon has convinced people or convinced a small set of folks who want a significant stake in the company to step up and buy it at that price? I suppose it's possible, but if I were to put odds on it, I would say it's less likely than likely.
Maybe the stock and bond markets are casting the same bit of doubt as we watch the stock trade and the bonds as well. Toni, I mean, you put together a list of 8 questions that you need answered, really, to get more perspective on this. The first is, what does Musk mean by the funding secured? What do you make of that in and of itself? That would seem to suggest that he's ready to make this happen.
It would seem to suggest. I mean, the statement from the board did not reaffirm that explicitly, and one can't help wondering that if the discussion was opened with the board just last week, that putting together that kind of funding in a short amount of time frame would feel unlikely. Now, it's certainly possible that in conversations with major shareholders, Elon had floated this idea, and major shareholders were supportive and said they'd roll over their shares into a private structure, and perhaps that has provided the confidence, and perhaps he's had expressions of interest from other people. But what exactly secure means is difficult to say. I think when most investors hear the word funding secured, they believe it's lined up. And, as best we can tell, and I think many third parties have also sort of put out feelers, there's no evidence of that happening. So it would suggest, if it is the case, that it's with existing shareholders and or with a very small group of equity providers.
What do you make of the whole regulatory sidebar now that surrounds the story in and of itself with the Musk tweet and the way this whole thing was disseminated in the first place?
Look, I'm not a lawyer, so it's very difficult to say. Obviously, short sellers are feeling pain, and this is going to escalate the battle with short sellers. So you could see there being aspersions cast that this was not done in full faith, et cetera. But, we're really talking about subtleties around language, around words like funding secured, and around words like, well, the deal is done, but just needs shareholder approval. That's difficult for me to weigh in on in terms of what potential legal implications there will be. But certainly, short sellers have paid a heavy price, and if this weren't to transpire, they could be looking to try and recoup some of their losses somehow.
So I'm trying to figure out what, as an analyst and a very well-known one at that, so how do you model this out then, Toni? What do you do from here forward as you try and figure out all the different scenarios and modeling out what you think the company's going to do in the near future?
Look, like everyone else, we're waiting for incremental news. I think when investors ask us today, how do you feel about the stock? We sort of try and frame it this way, which is, look, yesterday the stock was trading at around $340 before news broke of the Saudi investment and then ultimately Elon's tweets. The stock's now at 375 to 380. My guess is if there was a lot more progress and there was a potential buyout at 420, maybe the stock could go to 400. Stocks rarely trade at their deal value unless there's a belief that there'll be another suitor involved, and then they usually trade at some kind of discount prior to closing because stuff can go wrong. So I feel like the stock on the upside could go to 400 in the near to medium term. On the other hand, if this unwinds, I think you could have downside to yesterday's level, which is 340 or less, given that if it unwinds, there could be all these questions about, was this really done in good faith? Could there be any risk to Elon Musk and his being the CEO of the company, or could the company be sidetracked by accusations and and legal challenges going forward? So when I think of that upside downside risk, and you have to obviously ascribe probabilities to what you think will occur, that's how I try and dimension it for investors.
You're suggesting that part of this may have been motivated, by Musk trying to land a knockout blow to the shorts, who he's sparred with. It's been widely discussed, the battles that he's had with some of the names. Jim Chanos, when I reached him yesterday for his reaction, I'm going to read you what he said, Tony, and I'd love to get your reaction to it. This is Chanos' quote: "The short position is the best thing the stock has going for it. Musk versus the shorts is a far better narrative than Tesla versus Mercedes, Audi, Porsche." What do you think?
Look, I mean, clearly the Musk short seller debate has been, highly entertaining, has engendered a following among Tesla investors, among the broader media and public, and I think it's created very impassioned stakeholders on both sides of this. Now, did Elon sort of purposely do this? No one will ever know. Purposely try and squeeze out shorts? No one will ever know. I think Elon's. There's lots of examples where Elon's brain works faster and things get blurted out, which are not either fully flushed out or which are germinating with him. And that's the nature of Elon. And so this could certainly have been, this is something we've discussed at the board. I've talked about it with major shareholders, and he's tweeting it out. And again, there are lots of precedents for Elon doing that. That may not necessarily mean that was a purposeful tweet to squeeze out shorts. It may just be Elon's a person who will put stuff out there, whether it's on earnings calls, whether it be through tweets, that he's sort of ruminating through, and that's the nature of who he is.